So the WNBA just witnessed their players' entire negotiation strategy completely fall apart on national television. And honestly, nobody saw this coming the way it did. While stars across the league were out here threatening to strike, pushing hard for that 30% cut of gross revenue, telling league executives they had real options if things didn't work out, their supposed backup plan just hemorrhaged about 65% of its viewership in a single year. Unrivaled, the league that was positioned to give these players all the leverage they thought they needed in negotiations, just dropped numbers so catastrophically bad that you've got high school basketball programs pulling better ratings right now. And now those same players who were ready to walk away from the table are quietly reconsidering whether playing under their existing contracts might actually be the smart move. The bluff just got called in the most brutal way imaginable. Before we break down exactly how this entire situation unraveled, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on those notifications because this story has layers that nobody in mainstream media is willing to touch. If you're not subscribed yet, you're legitimately missing out on the real analysis that goes beyond the surface level takes. Here's what makes this situation absolutely wild when you really think about it. The two people who actually created Unrivaled, Brina Stewart and Nafisa Collier, they're not just some random players trying to start a side business. These two are literally vice presidents of the players' union that's been sitting across the table negotiating with WNBA executives. Think about that dynamic for a second. The same people who are telling the league to pay up or watch them leave just watch their own alternative league lose two-thirds of its television audience on networks that millions of people have access to. You genuinely cannot make this stuff up if you tried. It's like threatening to quit your job while your side hustle is actively going bankrupt in front of everyone. But here's where it gets even more insane, and I'm about to show you another league that's been quietly signing WNBA stars to deals, including the actual president of the Players Union herself, and why that development might be the real threat that nobody's talking about seriously enough. Stay with me because this gets absolutely wild. Let's break down what just happened to Unrivaled's viewership, because these numbers are genuinely catastrophic when you look at them. Last year during their inaugural season, Unrivaled's opening night managed to pull in about 312,000 viewers across TNT and True TV combined. Not exactly groundbreaking numbers, but for a brand new women's basketball league launching in the middle of the offseason when people are hungry for hoops content, that was actually pretty solid performance. People were curious about the format. They tuned in to see what this was all about. There was legitimate buzz building around the league. Fast forward to this year, and opening day averaged just 107,000 viewers spread across all 4 games they aired. That's not a slight dip in the ratings. That's not even a concerning decline. That's a complete nosedive straight off a cliff without a parachute. And somehow it manages to get so much worse when you dig into the details. The games that aired exclusively on True TV have been averaging around 32,000 viewers. 32,000 people. I've got individual videos on this channel that pull more eyeballs than that. Let that reality sink in for a moment. A professional basketball league featuring some of the biggest names in women's sports is pulling the exact same viewership numbers as a mid-tier YouTube video that some random creator posted last week. Last season during their first year, Unrivaled managed to average 221,000 viewers across the entire season on TNT's coverage. Their championship game peaked at about 385,000 viewers watching. That one-on-one tournament between Nafisa Collier and Aaliyah Edwards hit around 377,000 viewers. Those were the high points they celebrated. Those were the moments they were supposed to build momentum from going into year 2. Those numbers were supposed to be the foundation for serious growth. Now look at where we are. Games that aired on January 9th averaged about 139,000 viewers. Games on January 10th and 11th pulled roughly 71,000 viewers on True TV. The audience didn't just shrink a little bit, it literally disappeared into thin air. It evaporated like water in the desert. And you know what's actually hilarious about all this? Unrivaled CEO Alex Basil came out publicly and said they're building this thing for the long game, right? He literally said that leagues aren't built overnight, like he's dropping some profound wisdom. I absolutely love it when executives break out the Rome wasn't built in a day line to explain away terrible performance. You know what else is true though? Leagues also aren't built by losing 65% of your television audience in your second year of existence. That's not building anything. That's watching something collapse in real time while you're standing there with a fire extinguisher. Of course, Unrivaled is desperately trying to spin this absolute disaster into something positive. They came out this week claiming they're on track to hit $40 million in total revenue, which would represent a 48% increase from last year's numbers. They're pointing to merchandise sales being up about 54% year over year. Social media impressions have supposedly climbed 27% according to their internal metrics. They're highlighting how their Philadelphia tour stop scheduled for January 30th sold out completely at a 17,000-seat arena. Look, good for them on those merchandise sales. I'm genuinely happy that people are buying the hoodies and jerseys and supporting the product that way. But here's the thing that they're conveniently not addressing head-on. None of that other stuff matters even a little bit if nobody's actually watching the games on television. The TV deal is what pays the real bills at the end of the day. The TV deal is what gives players legitimate leverage when they're sitting across from WNBA executives in CBA negotiations. And that TV deal they signed with TNT, it's reportedly worth 9 figures total. But buried in that contract is an opt-out clause that kicks in after just 3 years. If these ratings don't turn around dramatically and soon, TNT can absolutely walk away from this deal without looking back. You can sell all the t-shirts and hoodies you want to passionate fans. But if your television partner decides to bounce after year 3 because the numbers don't justify the investment, you're in seriously deep trouble as a league. And right now, based on these viewership numbers, they're giving TNT every single reason to activate that opt-out clause when it becomes available. Now some people watching this are definitely going to say, well, hold on, they were competing directly with NFL playoff games and the college football playoff during those windows. Yeah, that's absolutely true. That's brutal competition for any basketball league. But here's the counterpoint to that argument. You knew that competition was coming months in advance. You chose to launch your season in that exact window anyway, knowing what you'd be up against. That was your strategic decision to make. And even if we account for that absolutely brutal competition from football, losing 2/3 of your audience year over year is catastrophic no matter how you try to frame it. That's not something you can explain away by pointing at the NFL schedule. That's a fundamental problem with your actual product and what you're offering viewers. But here's the real reason why Unrivaled's ratings absolutely tanked this year, and this is the part that nobody in the media wants to say out loud because it's uncomfortable. Look at who's not suiting up this season compared to last year. Caitlin Clark is not playing in Unrivaled. Aja Wilson's not there either. Angel Reese is sitting out the entire season citing injury concerns. Sabrina Ionescu decided not to participate. The 4 biggest names in women's basketball right now, the 4 players who actually move the viewership needle in measurable ways, every single one of them skipped Unrivaled's second season completely. And that reality tells you everything you actually need to know about the current state of women's basketball as a business. The audience isn't showing up for the sport itself just because it's women's basketball. They're showing up for specific players they want to watch. When Caitlin Clark takes the court, people tune in by the millions. When she doesn't play, they don't watch. It really is that simple and brutal. And Unrivaled just proved that dynamic in the most undeniable way possible with hard numbers that nobody can dispute. This isn't me trying to be mean or negative about women's basketball. This is just reality backed up by hard data that doesn't lie. Breanna Stewart even basically admitted this reality after a game last week when she was being interviewed. She said something like, TV ratings are a huge one and they want to make sure that the ratings are consistently high. But here's the problem, wishing really hard for good ratings doesn't magically make them appear on your screen. You need the star players, and the star players simply aren't there this season. She literally said the quiet part out loud without realizing it. Without the draw players who move the needle, nobody really cares about tuning in. And that's a massive problem when you're actively trying to use this league as leverage in negotiations with the WNBA. Okay, so we just spent a lot of time talking about Unrivaled and their viewership collapse. How does any of this actually affect the WNBA moving forward? Why does any of this even matter to the bigger picture? Well, here's the thing, Unrivaled was supposed to be the player's ace in the hole during these negotiations. It was created specifically and intentionally to give WNBA players real leverage when they're sitting across from team owners in contract negotiations. The entire strategic plan was incredibly simple on paper. If the WNBA doesn't agree to pay us what we believe we're worth, we have somewhere else we can go play professionally. We have legitimate options on the table. We don't actually need you as much as you think we do. Nafisa Collier literally came out and said this part out loud to ESPN. She told them that leagues like Unrivaled give us more leverage to make the WNBA do the right thing and pay us what we're owed as players. She actually said the quiet part out loud to a reporter. Unrivaled exists primarily to apply pressure to the WNBA during negotiations. That was the entire strategic point of creating this league in the first place. But here's the fundamental problem with trying to use something as leverage in a negotiation. It actually has to work as intended. Your backup plan has to be credible and realistic. Your threat has to be something the other side takes seriously. And right now in this moment, Unrivaled is pulling 32,000 viewers on True TV during some games. That's not leverage you can use at a negotiating table. That's a liability that undermines your position. That's honestly a joke that makes you look weaker. Think about what this dynamic means when you're actually sitting at the negotiating table trying to get a deal done. 6 days ago, the WNBA CBA deadline officially passed without an agreement. The players refused to extend it any further. They let it expire completely because they genuinely thought they had real leverage to use. They thought they could hold out for that 30% of gross revenue they're demanding because, hey, if this WNBA thing doesn't work out the way we want, we've got Unrivaled waiting for us as a backup option. Well, Unrivaled just posted viewership numbers that would honestly make a high school basketball game jealous of their performance. The WNBA team owners are looking at those ratings and probably laughing behind closed doors. Why would they cave to players' demands and give up significant money when the players' only real alternative is a league that's actively sinking on television? When your backup plan is failing this publicly and dramatically, you don't actually have leverage anymore. What you have is desperation disguised as confidence. One player even gave this absurd analogy about the current situation, saying something like, "You want Applebee's and I want Chipotle and we can't even figure out what our order is." And here's what she doesn't seem to realize about that comparison. When you're genuinely hungry and your only other dining option in town just closed down permanently, you take whatever's actually on the menu in front of you. You don't get to be picky and demanding when you literally have no viable alternatives to choose from. Here's the thing though, and I want to be really clear about this because I've said it before and I'll say it again without hesitation. I actually do think WNBA players deserve significantly more money than they're currently making. The league just completed its most successful season in its entire history. Viewership numbers were up dramatically across the board. Attendance at games was way up. The new TV deal they signed is worth a staggering $2.2 billion over its lifespan. The players absolutely helped build that success story. Caitlin Clark brought more eyes and attention to this league than it's ever had in nearly 30 years of existence. The players are definitely a huge part of that overall success, and they absolutely should share in the financial rewards that come with it. There's a massive difference, though, between deserving something and actually having the leverage to demand it at the negotiating table. And right now, in this specific moment, the players have literally zero leverage. None whatsoever. They decided to play chicken with the league thinking they had options, and the league just called their bluff decisively. They're standing there at the table with completely empty hands while the league is holding all the cards and knows it. Let's actually break down what's being offered on the table right now, because I think some people have genuinely lost perspective on what these numbers represent. The WNBA's current proposal on the table would take the maximum salary from $249,000 annually to about $1.3 million. That's more than 5 times what the current max salary is right now. The average player salary would jump from $120,000 to over $530,000 per year. The minimum salary would leap from around $67,000 to approximately $250,000 for players at the bottom of rosters. And when you factor in that the average WNBA season runs about 4 months from start to finish, a $250,000 minimum salary for 4 months of work is absolutely incredible compensation. That's not a slap in the face to players. That's not disrespectful to their contributions. That's legitimately the biggest raise in the entire history of women's professional sports anywhere in the world. The players still looked at that offer and said, no, we want more. The players are demanding 30% of gross revenue, which would create a salary cap around $10.5 million per team. The league is offering 70% of net revenue instead, which would create a salary cap closer to $5 million per team. The league is saying publicly that the players' proposal would cost them approximately $700 million in losses over the life of this deal. Look, I totally get the argument about gross versus net revenue. It's a legitimate debate to have. The players don't want the league using creative accounting to hide money in expenses. They don't want ownership groups playing games with the numbers to make profitability look worse than it actually is. But here's the harsh reality that nobody wants to acknowledge. The WNBA lost somewhere between $40 and $50 million in 2024 according to reports, and that's with all the Caitlin Clark hype driving unprecedented attention. That's with record viewership and attendance numbers across the board. This league has been losing money consistently for almost 30 years of operation. The new TV deal absolutely helps the financial picture. It definitely helps a lot, but it doesn't instantly make the league profitable overnight like flipping a switch. So when the players demand 30% of gross revenue before any expenses are paid, they're essentially saying we want our cut before you pay any bills or cover any costs of operating. And the league is responding by saying we literally cannot afford that structure, we need profits to be sustainable. Somebody's going to have to blink first in this standoff. And with Unrivaled collapsing publicly on television, it's probably going to be the players who blink. So where does all this actually leave the CBA negotiations moving forward? Currently, the situation is in complete chaos and uncertainty. Remember, the deadline passed over a week ago on January 9th. They'd already extended that deadline twice before that point. Once at the end of October and once at the end of November when they couldn't reach a deal. This time around, there's no extension agreement. Both sides simply let the deadline expire without an agreement in place. The WNBA is now operating in what they officially call status quo mode, with a moratorium freezing all league business. Free agency is completely frozen in place. The expansion drafts for new franchises in Toronto and Portland are indefinitely delayed. Roughly 80% of players across the entire league are free agents right now, and none of them can actually sign contracts because nobody knows what the salary cap structure is going to look like. It's complete limbo for everyone involved. And remember that strike authorization vote that happened? A staggering 98% of players voted yes back in December to authorize a strike if necessary. That authorization is still active right now. The 7 players serving on the executive committee can call a strike at literally any moment if they decide that's the right move. But here's the question that every player needs to ask themselves honestly. If you're a WNBA player right now, do you genuinely want a strike at this particular moment? Your backup league is actively collapsing on national television for everyone to see. The WNBA is offering you 5 times your current salary in their proposal. And if you decide to strike, you might just prove to everyone watching that the league doesn't actually need you as much as you think. That's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to say out loud. The Players' Union released a statement accusing the league of failing to meet them at the negotiating table with the same spirit and seriousness they're bringing. They claimed the league was essentially running out the clock strategically. But after seeing those unrivaled viewership numbers collapse, maybe the league executives were just sitting back and waiting patiently for the players' leverage to completely disappear on its own. And it just did exactly that in spectacular fashion on national television for millions to witness. Now here's where this story takes a genuinely wild turn that most people aren't paying attention to yet. While Unrivaled is collapsing under its own weight, there's another league out there making some serious moves. It's called Project B, and they just announced their first official tournament location, Tokyo, Japan, scheduled for March 26 through April 4 inches 2027. Project B is building this Formula One style circuit concept, planning 7 tournaments spread across Asia, Europe, and the Americas. They're planning to run their entire circuit from November 2026 straight through April 2027. And here's the kicker, they're reportedly paying players over $2 million per year plus equity stakes in the league itself. And guess who's already signed up to participate? Nneka Ogwumike, who happens to be the president of the Players' Union. Alyssa Thomas signed up, Jonquil Jones is in, Jewel Lloyd committed, Kelsey Mitchell signed, Sophie Cunningham joined. That's 10 WNBA players total, including some of the biggest names currently playing in the sport, who have already signed deals to play in Project B. I'm genuinely sorry, but the irony here is just too perfect to ignore. The president of the union, who's actively negotiating for more money from the WNBA, has already signed a contract with a competing league. You legitimately cannot make this stuff up even if you tried. It's almost like watching a parody play out in real life at this point. Now here's an important detail about Project B that matters. Right now at this moment, their tournament schedule doesn't directly conflict with the WNBA season calendar. They're positioning themselves strategically as an off-season league option. But the WNBA has made it clear they want to expand their season significantly, possibly to 50 games, and they want to potentially start earlier in the calendar year. If those schedules start overlapping at some point, players are going to be forced to choose between leagues. And this is where things get really interesting strategically. Project B is funded in significant part by Saudi money flowing through a company called Sella. They've made it abundantly clear that they're completely open to becoming direct competition with the WNBA if that's how things develop. So while Unrivaled is actively collapsing before our eyes, Project B is quietly building something potentially bigger. The real question is whether they can actually deliver on those promised $2 million salaries long-term, or if they're just the next league in line to promise big and deliver absolutely nothing when reality hits. Because we've definitely seen this movie before. Big promises, big money being thrown around, and then economic reality comes crashing down. So what actually happens now moving forward? Honestly, I think the players are going to have to accept something very close to what the league is currently offering on the table. They don't really have much choice at this point in the negotiation. Not because they don't deserve more money, because they absolutely do deserve more, but because they genuinely have no leverage left to use. Unrivaled just proved decisively that women's basketball without the right star players doesn't draw a substantial television audience. Project B is still a full year away from launching and remains completely unproven as a viable option. The WNBA, despite all its problems and imperfections, is still the only truly stable professional option out there. It's been around for almost 30 years. It's subsidized financially by the NBA, which isn't going anywhere. The league itself is not going to disappear. Sabrina Stewart said last week that negotiations are basically in a holding pattern right now. Nafisa Collier said that nothing has really changed at the league level in terms of positions, but something absolutely has changed dramatically. Their leverage just evaporated completely on national television. Everyone watching saw it happen in real time. The smart strategic move for the players is actually pretty simple when you think about it. Take the deal that's on the table. Accept the 5 times salary increase being offered. Take those million-dollar maximum contracts that are available, build from that foundation going forward. Prove you can help grow the league sustainably over the next few years and then come back and demand even more in the next CBA negotiation cycle. That's how you actually build real leverage over time. The stubborn move that serves nobody well. Keep holding out indefinitely for 30% of gross revenue. Maybe decide to strike and shut down the season. Watch the league potentially replace striking players with younger talent who would be thrilled to make $250,000 as a minimum salary. Watch all the casual fans who just started paying attention because of Caitlin Clark lose interest again and move on to other sports. Watch everything you've built over the past year with Caitlin's arrival collapse completely because of ego and genuinely bad strategic decision-making. I said this in my last video about this situation, and I'm going to say it again because it bears repeating. I genuinely believe that WNBA players deserve more money than they're currently making. The growth over the past year has been absolutely real and measurable. Caitlin Clark has brought attention and eyeballs to this league that it has never experienced before in its entire history. The players are a fundamental part of that success story, but here's the harsh reality of business negotiations. Business doesn't care at all about what you deserve morally or what's fair. Business cares about leverage and power dynamics. Business cares about options and alternatives. Business cares about who has what to lose. And right now in this specific moment, the players have none of those things working in their favor. Unrivaled is collapsing before everyone's eyes. Project B is unproven and completely unreliable at this stage. They genuinely can't depend on it as a backup plan. The WNBA is the only real game in town, and they're offering the biggest salary raises in the entire history of women's professional sports anywhere in the world. The players threatened publicly to walk away from the table. They voted 98% to authorize a potential strike. They let the negotiation deadline expire without an extension. They talked tough about having options and alternatives and real leverage to use. And then Unrivaled posted 32,000 viewers on True TV, and all of that supposed leverage just disappeared overnight. Just gone completely. Evaporated into nothing. This is exactly what happens when you overplay your hand at the negotiating table, when you confuse leverage with a sense of entitlement, when your carefully planned backup strategy turns out to be a backup plan leading straight to failure. The WNBA called their bluff decisively, and now the players have a critical choice to make. Take the deal that makes multiple players into millionaires for the first time, or keep fighting for a percentage of gross revenue that might never actually come. In my last video, I compared this entire situation to the infamous 1994 baseball strike. Major League Baseball thought they had all the leverage in the world. They went on strike anyway thinking it would work out. And they're still paying the price for that decision 30 years later. The damage to baseball's popularity and cultural relevance has never fully recovered from that strike. The WNBA players are standing at the exact same crossroads right now, facing the exact same type of decision point. And honestly, I genuinely hope they make the smarter choice. Because if they don't, this league that's finally getting mainstream attention, that's finally breaking through to audiences who have never cared about women's basketball before, could lose absolutely all of that momentum in an instant. And it would be entirely because of a negotiation strategy that relied completely on a backup plan that couldn't deliver when it mattered most. Let me know what you think about all this in the comment section down below. Do you think the players should take the deal that's on the table, or should they hold out for more? Are they making a massive strategic mistake, or are they absolutely right to demand more? I genuinely want to hear your takes on this. And if you made it all the way to this point in the video, you're part of the real community that actually understands what's happening in this league beyond the surface level. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we're going to keep covering this story until it's completely resolved. Until next time.